All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Saros webinar. I am so excited to have y'all here and can't believe we're almost at the end of July. That is actually insane. Hope everyone is enjoying the summer sun, having some good weather. And has anyone been watching anything that has just really been captivating their entire like brain? Because I watched this new Netflix movie, and it is all I can think about music wise. So I just had to hit shuffle on something to play something besides music from K-pop Demon Hunters, because those K-pop songs just living in my head rent free. Let me know if there's any other movies y'all are or shows y'all are watching right now. I need something else to fixate on. But I see lots of familiar names, some new names, whether it's your first webinar, you're back for more. Very excited to have you here today. We do have a lot to cover, so I will go ahead and dive in. We are recording the session, so look out for an email afterwards. We'll share this out. And if there are any questions throughout, please feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and I'll get to those towards the end. Bye. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I'm a learning experience designer here at Saros on our Educate team. I've been at Saros for a little over 4 years now, and I help make content on our Educate site and facilitate some of our guided design courses and do these webinars. And I'm very excited for our topic today. Our focus is all about solving for interactivity in your creative workflow. So with that, our agenda for today, we're going to start by looking at creative workflows then and now. This is just so we can kind of get a better understanding of how interactive content can differ from current workflow processes. And then we'll dive into planning for interactive. These are just some things you can start incorporating in your ideation and brainstorming process. We'll also talk about working Saros into your workflow with your existing tech stack and other design tools you might be using, how you can collaborate with these, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end as well. Now, to set the scene here, each project and piece of content you work on is different when it comes to maybe your workflow that you have and the creative process that's involved. Some require a lot more than others, like a full micro page, landing page, versus an infographic or piece of content embedded on a site. And each organization and team definitely has different ways of working together and creating. So today we're really focused on sharing some tips, tricks, and best practices that we've noticed while working in Saros with y'all and working in Saros ourselves. So keeping that in mind, there really aren't any steadfast rules and requirements that we're going to be following, more like guidelines to kind of help you create a workflow that works for you and your team. So with that, I'm going to start with a question for y'all. And that's what's one part of your current workflow that you would love to streamline? You can take a second, think about it. This can be really any part of the process, whether it's actually creating the content or that feedback process, if it's your brainstorming, ideation, maybe it's prototyping, whatever it might be. What is one part of your current content workflow that you'd like to streamline? Ooh, okay, prototyping. Very good. Oh, another wireframing and prototyping. Ooh, okay, landing page creating, collecting source of truth into a singular location. That's a really good one. So like kind of getting everybody's goals and what we're aiming towards as well, like all in one place. I think that's a great one. Sweet. Really good answers, y'all. And very good to know. Hopefully I'll have some solutions or tips for y'all because we are going to be covering a lot of these things in our webinar today. But first, we're going to talk about our creative workflows and what they looked like then and now. Because before we can dive into specific tools, tactics, brainstorming, it's helpful to take a step back and look at how creative workflows have traditionally worked when it comes to content creation and how they've evolved, especially when we start designing for interactive content. Understanding these shifts can really help us see where there are opportunities to work smarter, collaborate better, and also just move through the process a bit quicker. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time that you have a new project. So we're going to start with the traditional static content, something we're probably all familiar with. And you can think of this as like a typical PDF, one pager, or graphics for social. The workflow usually goes something like this. And we can assume there's a team of specialists working on it, or yourself, one person show. But that copy gets created by the author, maybe it gets approved, proofread, and then it gets handed off for the design process, maybe with a creative brief. Design can lay out the content, source the imagery. There's another round or maybe a few rounds of feedback. And then finally, it is finalized and shared and exported. This is a very simplified version of it, but it is a pretty linear process and aren't as many stakeholders involved as something like web content. But it's clear it gets the job done for that type of content. Now, when we start contrasting that with traditional web content, that's when things get a little more complex because you start involving a lot of other stakeholders, like even just creating custom landing pages and microsites. You get creative, you get development, marketing, and then you bring in specialists for analytics and SEO and other stakeholders that might be involved in this, or partners that are involved in the content you're making, just for one example. And everybody has different timelines and different inputs and goals. So there's a lot of people and a lot of steps and a lot of waiting in this process. If you've been a part of it before, you know how much time could get eaten up by feedback, waiting to hear how the wireframe is, if it's approved, and the handoffs, all that stuff. But that's just how it can go for some teams, generally, when it comes to creating that traditional web content. Now, when you start creating content with Saros, this looks a little bit different. And the creative process really evolves when you're building interactive content in Saros. Specifically, that can also shift some of our assumptions about how we work as well. Because with Saros, your creative and marketing teams are really able to design, review, publish, all in platform. And when we look at these two processes side by side, then you can really see how they compare with one another. So let's take a look at both of them together. And a few things I'll call out. But one thing is that time spent on average that we found. Creating content with developers sometimes can take weeks with different handoffs, dev backlogs, that whole scope creep, let alone all the testing that has to happen before going live. And with Saros, again, all of that is happening in platform. You can make the revisions, publish. So we found that that can really cut those production times by more than half, which is crazy to think about. But the few things I do want to call out in this process that changes. One is the feedback loop. If we look at this with developers, like this is 7 days of feedback. And this is one of the biggest bottlenecks in traditional like dev workflows, especially when designs need to be handed off, implemented, reviewed, revised multiple times. Now in Saros, those feedback, those revisions, this is a little bit different because it's happening in studio. You can make the changes yourself, test your new ideas, get feedback faster without having to wait for like deployment schedules. And so revisions are quicker, like for this one, saving on average 10 days, which is crazy. And then last one is going live and publishing. So that publishing process becomes a lot simpler. Instead of multiple rounds of quality assurance, different code pushes, you can go live as soon as your experience is ready and even update it after it's published. So this approach to creating content in Saros can feel very different at first, especially if you're used to locking in your content, everything that's included, having that mock-up super polished when it goes to the dev team. But this process with Saros can really open up space for a lot more exploration, creativity, and ultimately a lot more effective creation process. So with all of that in mind, there are some key changes that can happen when you start incorporating interactivity in your workflow, especially with Saros. And we find it's not just about what you create, it's how you think about creating as well with interactivity. And a lot of the times, it's not just about adding like more complexity to your pieces and your content. In a lot of cases, it's just about removing unnecessary steps to help tell your story and make it interactive. So some of the core shifts that can tend to happen when you start designing with interactivity in mind. One is that you start thinking about that user journey a lot earlier. It's not just how something is designed and then it gets tested later, and you can test out UX, UI, hear back after testing. But this one, it's more about how it's experienced and how your story's told, because folks are engaging with it and interacting with it a lot. Another is your design and your content really come together a lot sooner because there's less handoff. It's more collaboration from the jump. And prototyping, I know that was one that was mentioned in our question earlier, but your prototyping can become a lot more fluid because you are testing ideas faster, getting feedback earlier. And lastly, publishing process is more iterative. You can go live quickly, update easily, and adapt without waiting for long dev cycles. So now that we have a very clear picture of how our workflows have shifted from traditional static, traditional web to interactive content in Saros, now we can start thinking about how we plan and structure our content and how we plan for interactive content. Now, there's not one magical formula here, again, because every team's different. You might be on a big team with lots of specialists, one who specializes in video, graphics, copywriting, you name it, marketing, while others might be wearing all of the hats for that team. So rather than those one-size-fits-all approaches, we're just going to think out some ideas that y'all can implement in your process, whatever your team size and workflow calls for. So point here really isn't just to add more work, but it's just to find ways to use interactive content without reinventing that wheel for y'all. So let's look at a very simple way to look at content creation when it comes to interactive. You have your static content. You have your copy, maybe some graphics, visuals that you gather, and then you start wireframing it. You have your low fidelity, medium fidelity, and high fidelity wireframes that you can create. And once that gets approved, you can make it interactive and build it out in Saros. Add those interactions and animations to really help tell your story and paint that picture. But before we can even really start this process of wireframing, making it interactive, thinking about that, we are going to start from the very beginning with our brainstorming process. So here is a very quick breakdown of one possible brainstorming process and what this could look like for you and your team. Now, we're not going to dive into this entire process. I'll give you the quick rundown, but we're really going to be focusing on the steps in this first part. But step one, briefing. This is really where everybody can get on the same page, all of your stakeholders, anybody that's involved in the project, whether it's just you and your supervisor or your entire content team that's working on it. And this is where you can figure out questions people have and what the goals are for this specific project. And this you can do even if you have content already created that maybe you just want to bring into Saros and make interactive. You can just come back and brainstorm that interactive narrative you want to tell and how you can do interactive storytelling. You'll break down the content, go over an overview with that, and then we'll cover this very simple how might we question experience. And then maybe after you go through these steps, you do rapid prototyping where you just pen to paper, think through your experience. Everybody can discuss and vote, and then you can wrap up the brainstorming and move on to gathering all the content. But again, we're focusing on step one here, where we're going to try to figure out what the goal is and what the story we're trying to tell. Because interactive storytelling can really help set the tone for your entire experience. So what's the story? What's the goal? Maybe you're trying to get people to sign up for your site or sign up for a newsletter. Maybe you want them to download something, or maybe you just want them to learn more about your product or your thought piece. Really think about what that one thing is and the action that you want them to take, because your goals can really drive the ideation and where your interactivity goes. It really helps set the tone for the rest of your brainstorming process. For example, if we want to get people to download this water usage app that tracks how much water they use, one story that we could tell to get people interested in this is showing them how to conserve water in their day-to-day. maybe show them some simple ways to save water in their daily life and show how much water they would end up saving. Another example here, maybe you want them to download a full report. The story you could tell for that to get people interested is to tease out 3 predictions for retail or for whatever your report entails for that year or the previous year, and get them really excited to read more and be interested in that. Now, another question for y'all. So let's say we're trying to figure out our story. What's our interactive story here? If our goal is to try to get more signups for this year's summit, it's a very big summit. We want to get people excited for it. What is one of the stories we could tell for that? What could our story be for this piece? If our goal is to get them to sign up for 2025 summit of some random company, what are some stories we could tell with that? No wrong answers either. Any ideas? Maybe we could, yes, absolutely. We could, you could show what attendees can learn from the summit. That's a really great one. What are they going to take away from it? Why is it worth their time if they're traveling for it or if they're joining online? Maybe we can show panelists for this year to get them excited, tell the story of what that experience is going to be like. Or you can even highlight testimonials or videos from people who attended last year and really get that excitement going from the previous year. Awesome, great example. So once you know your goal, then you can kind of lean on that to tell a story for your content, lean into that interactive storytelling. And then in your brainstorming process, you can also start asking this very simple brainstorming question, which is, how might we? This is one that I really wanted to highlight, especially if you're working with a team or involving other stakeholders early on in your design process, because it can be a really useful and simple tool to just start opening up creative ideas without jumping too quickly into executing the design and prototyping. It just helps take a step back and ask, what are we actually trying to do here with this piece? And how can interactive storytelling support that? So some questions you can ask are, how might we make this fun and exciting? Very simple. You can ask, how might we encourage people to take the next step? And if you're working on existing content, we can think, okay, how might we repurpose part of this Figma design and make it interactive and help tell this story? But these how might we questions can really help focus on the problem you're solving for and how to solve it. It gets everybody thinking about that goal and guide the design and the types of interactions that you choose. So again, they really help figure out the problem you're solving for, how to solve it, gets everybody on the same page, and really helps you approach the functionality and sets the stage for prototyping, which I know is something we were talking about streamlining a little bit. So if we were, let's say, planning a product launch campaign, some questions that I might ask are, how might we make these key features more engaging so that users want to learn all about these 6 key features? Or how might we show all of this content without it being information overload? Just these little questions can help spark ideas for everybody. And then you can do some rapid prototyping with everyone and think, okay, if we want to show these 6 pieces for our product launch, these are some ideas for that. And then you can start thinking about how that interactive piece comes in. And just a little refresh on some interactive opportunities here. I know we cover this in a lot of other webinars and some of our courses. So just a refresh on moments for interactivity that you can bring to these brainstorming sessions too. You can always highlight images, make them interactive, make them flip cards. You can also highlight those bullet points and lists, make them interactive instead of just having those blocks of text. If you have a map, maybe you're showing off where the location of that summit is, make that interactive, and any key themes. That's great moments for interactivity. And again, this is no means like an exhaustive list of interactions, just some good ones that you can keep in the back of your head and even share with folks that you're brainstorming with. So once you have done that, your team's aligned on your story, goal, this really does become easier to find these moments of interactivity that can elevate your piece. So the rest of the process, like wireframing, designing, building, can start to flow a lot more naturally. Again, because we're collaborating from the jump. So now that we've got a good plan on how to think about interactive content, we're actually going to jump into how Saros can fit into other design platforms and other tools you might be using, and working Saros into your workflow. Now, whenever a lot of teams are learning how to operationalize Saros, some common questions that we'll get are like, how does Studio work with Figma? Does Studio replace Illustrator or this other tool I use? And how do I get my existing designs into Studio? And these are all great questions. And really the main answer for all of these is that you don't have to change what works for you. Saros isn't here to replace all of your tools in your toolbox. We're really here to work alongside them. Now, for your workflow, some people may prefer using Studio in like every step of the way, and that works. It really just depends on your preference. But we're going to take a look at a workflow example to see how all of these different tools can work together. So, for example, we're going to take a look at my boss's Dallin's workflow. Now, he is our director of education here at Saros, and this is one of his design workflows that he often finds himself doing. He's been using Saros for the past 6 years, first as a user and now as an educator. And he has over a decade of design experience. So he has found a workflow that really works for him and his use case, which is going to be different than yours, mine. And this is his workflow here for a lot of his projects. So he will often brainstorm content plan in Miro, do his copywriting in Google Docs, do some visual designing in Illustrator, layout prototyping in Figma, and then he brings it all together to build it and publish it in Saros Studio. And this works for him because of his role, the content types he's creating, and his different skill sets. Now, my workflow is a bit different because I'm on the learning experience design side. So my work often involves input from other people and pulling copy maybe from some subject matter experts, maybe from our support team or product team. And I'll request visuals from our multimedia designer. So my process might look like gathering notes, research, goals in Miro, writing my copy there, bringing it into Google Docs, having somebody finalize that. And then sometimes I'll wireframe in Figma. Sometimes I'll do a rough sketch wireframe in Miro. Oftentimes I even like to wireframe like pen to paper. And then I'll request graphics from our designer, Alex. Shout out to Alex, amazing. And then I bring everything together in Saros. So a lot of the times, if we're creating these things outside of it, Saros is where we bring everything in to bring it to life, add your interactions, add your animations, and publish it. So really, point of all of this to say is that your process will depend on what tools you're using, the content you're creating, and your team's workflow as well. So if you're wireframing and designing across other platforms, Saros is where you can finish your project and bring it to life. Now, if you are working in any of these other platforms like Figma, Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, or a PDF, you can directly bring those files into Studio. However, with importing design files from Photoshop, Illustrator, PDF, and Sketch, sometimes you might find that just copying and pasting the assets over might be more efficient, especially if you're just bringing in 1 or 2 assets. No need to import a whole design file when you can just copy and paste directly into Saros. Now, if you're working with Figma, we do have a Figma plugin that will copy and paste your content into the studio directly. And really, with any of these other design tools that you're working with, they're all very powerful, very complex, and you can think of them as sort of speaking their own language. So when we move content from one tool to the other. You can think of it as like translating languages. And it's really impressive when we think about it that they're able to even talk to each other and transfer from one another. So with that in mind, they're not always going to be one-to-one translations because some things may get mixed up in the process, but it's really about finding the best way to bring them in with your designs and your workflow. For example, if Dallin's prototyping in Figma, he'll export his visuals from Illustrator and or Figma and import them into Studio, and then he'll just recreate the text boxes and shapes that were in the experience. And then with that, he'll make it go live. And he has also done a full post on Educate that we can share out afterwards, going into this workflow a little bit more with like tips and tricks, best practices, little things like that. So if you want to learn more on like how he brings Figma assets in, what he's found along the way, highly recommend. He's got a lot of great tips in there. But if you haven't played around with Figma and that plugin yet, definitely recommend experimenting with it and determining how you can best use it in your workflow. Now, we do have a lot of other resources on Educate about Sketch, Illustrator, PDF, and how you can really best prepare them to bring them into Saros and have the most success for importing, whether it's, bringing it in at a certain ratio, little things like that. We have those resources on Educate. So whether you're on a full team relay working in these different design tools or on like a solo sprint, finishing everything yourself, Saros is really designed to meet you where you're at with your tools. So definitely play around with the import functions, play around with the Figma plugin if you use Figma, and see how they can really work for you and your process. And then we do have some other tools in our suite that can really help support you in your collaboration when it comes to the reviewing, editing, and scaling your content. So let's take a look at how we can collaborate a little easier. Now, we do have that ecosystem of products to help you out, starting with the basics. We've got Studio, and there's a few very simple ways that you can get your team involved and bring in collaborators. So I'll go ahead and hop to Studio, or our admin, to show you here. Let's check it out. Perfect. So when you're in your admin, you go to your team settings here, depending on your role in the account, but you can invite folks to your team. Just add their email. Maybe I want to bring in Travis. I can just add his email and select his role. Now, different roles have different permissions and what they can access. Like owners, creators, editors, those have different seat numbers according to different accounts. But you can also add reviewers and viewers to just to view your content and review like analytics and things like that. So that's one way. Another way is directly in Studio. I can hop into our webinar deck, actually. We'll get a little meta with it. Now, when you're in Studio, you can invite folks directly to an experience with this icon here at the top. Again, you can add their email. Let's invite Alex this time. You can add them, adjust their role, and send the invite. And then, of course, there is our preview link. This is that real-time preview. It's a read-only view, so they don't have to have an account to access this preview link. You can share it with any of your stakeholders that needs to review your content. And this preview link becomes a lot more powerful when you pair it with Markup. Now, Markup is our collaborative feedback tool. If you haven't heard of it yet, then buckle up, we're in for a treat. It is included with most Saros accounts, and you can actually open it up with this common button here. If we open an experience in Markup, pause for dramatic effect while it catches up with me. But you can use this to give real-time feedback and consolidate it all in one place. Very handy. You don't have to have like an insane email thread to track down all of the feedback or a Slack thread. But here is our Markup. And in it, you can browse the content And you can leave comments, like maybe I want to change the photo. And then you can even see your comments over on the left. So you can see any active comments you have, any that you've resolved. Super handy. And markup isn't just for Saros experiences. It's super handy for Saros because we created it with Saros in mind, but you can use it for over 30 different file formats, like other websites, PDFs, videos, you name it. So it's really handy. I actually have this one created. And whenever you do want to share out a markup with your stakeholders, collaborators, again, you can add their emails, or you can even just share this link. I'll actually share this link in the chat with y'all. So you don't have to create that markup account. Y'all can actually just, oh, I see. I didn't even send it. There we go. So now y'all can go into this markup and start marking it up. Feel free to just leave some comments and test it out if you'd like, if you haven't before. I can even update this status of this so you can see if it's open for review, on hold, so folks can know exactly where you're at in the editing process and make that even smoother for you. So you can pause new comments as you're editing the content. It makes it really easy to streamline everything. Perfect. So again, can use it for things outside of Saros, but very handy. Keeps everything kind of centralized. Don't have to chase down feedback because it's all here. Awesome. Now let's go back to our tab here. So we've covered Studio, we've covered markup. Last one I did want to highlight is the editor tool. This is used to help scale your content, and it is a separate role in Saros, and it lets users update, copy, swap out media, or even change URLs and interactions. And they can do all of this without actually touching the design structure in the Studio and digging through your layers in the Studio as well. Here's like a very quick example of what the UI looks like. They have a consolidated toolbar, just the essentials, and can edit a few things based on the experience. But this is really perfect for team members that need to just make quick edits, and it really can free up a lot of time for your design team to focus on new content. And it also lets you make more localized, personalized templates so that other people can go in and make those quick edits instead of having to dive into the Studio and completely redo it. All right, but I know we've covered a lot today, did a lot of talking, but we have covered a lot from looking at how creative workflows have evolved to thinking about interactive content, strategy, brainstorming, and how you can fold Saros into your design process. So some big takeaways here. One is that you don't have to reinvent your entire process for interactive content. If anything, making it more collaborative from the start is going to help you a lot with that. And then that great interactivity really does start with your storytelling and goal setting. What is the story you want to tell and the action you want users to take? That can really help set you up for your interactivity later on. Now, Saros doesn't have to replace your tools. It can work alongside them. However you get here, Saros is just a place to bring it all together and publish it and make it interactive. And then again, collaboration really is built into Saros. So use it to your advantage to streamline and scale and make your design process and workflow a lot easier for you. So I hope you leave with some new ways to think about your process and maybe have some ideas on how you're going to approach your new projects or current projects. But with that, I will open it up if there's any questions in the chat. Happy to answer those. Let's see. All right. Any questions before we wrap for today? All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for coming to another Saros webinar. Hope y'all enjoyed and very excited to see y'all for the next one. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your summer. No worries if you were late, we'll send out the recording. But enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks, y'all.